Hi, my name is Rachel, and I will be discussing the 2013 article Climate Change Policy, A Race to the Top. This article looks at the different approaches to environmental regulation at the state level, specifically looking at California's so-called Race to the Top approach and considering its effects on the environment and the economy. This issue is important because it involves weighing economic health against environmental health, something that is very important for those creating energy policy or those being affected by energy policy to consider. While it is well understood that fighting climate change with strong environmental policy is urgently needed, many citizens see economic health and prosperity as more urgent to them personally and might be rightfully concerned that regulations meant to promote environmental health could result in job loss and further economic disruption in their home states. This is because when environmental regulations on polluting industries increase, many businesses will simply relocate to jurisdictions with fewer regulations, while others will struggle to compete with goods coming from those less strict jurisdictions. As a result, many states will engage in what the authors describe as a race to the bottom, basically competing to have the least stringent standards for environmental regulation in an effort to bring in those businesses that states like California don't want polluting their natural environment. California has taken the opposite approach, expecting businesses to bend to their demands for more environmentally friendly practices. Seeing as climate change itself could have its own negative impact on the economy, disrupting numerous industries including the energy sector, California's race to the top approach could arguably be quite healthy for the economy in the long run, despite economic setbacks of policies like California's cap and trade policy, which, while reducing emissions, also poses the risk of raising prices on energy sources such as oil, coal, and natural gas. While California's race to the top approach has historically been used to address local externalities, whether this approach can remain as a way to fight the issue of climate change on a larger scale without seriously disrupting the economy is another conversation. The purpose of this article seems to me to be largely about forcing readers and policymakers to think about whether a race to the top approach will be economically sustainable going forward. The authors note that California's policies are based on the best available scientific evidence, the strong environmental sentiment of their population, and progressive-minded political leadership, and that some states that did not follow California's ambitious climate policies are now paying the price and trying to catch up, not only for environmental reasons, but because they are interested in capturing the increasing number of green jobs and investments that California has enjoyed for their own jurisdictions. For these reasons, it seems that the authors take a somewhat appreciative stance towards California's climate policies, but don't stop short of encouraging readers to think critically about economic impacts of such radical policy on a larger scale, and whether such policy could work anywhere else as well as it has worked in California. My assertion earlier in this presentation that climate change itself could have its own negative impact on the economy, and that California may actually be helping its economy in the long run by taking this race to the top approach, is addressed somewhat in Martin L. Weitzman's 2009 article on modeling and interpreting the economics of catastrophic climate change, where Weitzman discusses the probability distribution of potential climate damages on the economy as having fat tails, meaning there is a reasonable possibility that climate change could bring enormous economic damages, but also that there is considerable uncertainty surrounding the precise likelihood of a catastrophic event. If I am interpreting Weitzman's section about possible implications for climate change policy correctly, then the presence of fat tails in the damage distribution may be a sign that policymakers should be following California's lead by placing a greater emphasis on mitigation strategies to reduce the risk of catastrophic damages, even if the likelihood of such damages is relatively small. Mitchell et al.'s 2016 article about carbon lock-in dives more deeply into the causes and impacts of strong climate policy, exploring the relationship between technological, institutional, and behavioral lock-in. The authors argue that institutional lock-in, behavioral lock-in, and technological lock-in are interconnected and all influence each other. Similarly, green public opinion and institutional and technological changes aimed at benefiting the environment can influence each other. This is what the authors of Climate Change Policy, Erased at the Top describe, where the California population's desire for strong climate policy has resulted in green policies being passed, further influencing institutional and technological advancement towards pollution reduction, and continuing in a cycle where the behavioral, technological, and institutional leanings towards pro-environmentalism are constantly influencing each other and encouraging California down a continuing path of green policy. One key thing to note about this relationship is how Mitchell et al. Describe behavioral lock-in as being a result of green alternatives being unaffordable, such as electric vehicles historically being less affordable and encouraging the continued reliance on fossil fuels, or older buildings being more affordable but also having gas appliances. California's institutional and technological escape from the lock-in has created paths towards easier affordability of a green lifestyle, encouraging an escape from the behavioral lock-in that is often just a result of inaccessibility. Climate Change Policy, Erased to the Top, challenges its readers to think about the complicated relationship between different policy interests and how policymakers have to work through these competing interests to determine what will be best for everyone. A common complaint against Democrats is that they do not consider the economic implications of their policies, including green policies. Alternatively, Republicans have become well known as defenders of fossil fuels and have been called too soft on environmental policy. This article tests both of these claims by using the most extreme example of the more left-leaning policy approach to climate change, and to a small degree comparing the outcomes of this approach with the outcomes of approaches that less environmentally aggressive states have taken. While further research surrounding how climate-friendly policy affects the economy in more specific ways could be useful in the future, such as looking at the correlation between energy poverty rates and strong climate policy, this paper does a good job of looking at why and how such strong policies have been able to gain such broad support in California over so many decades. By breaking down a standout example of policymakers taking the less conventional approach to an arguably urgent issue, they provide an opportunity for analysis of whether such policies could work elsewhere and how California has benefited from and at times paid the price for its strong but unconventional policy choices. The discussion surrounding the effectiveness and potential disruptions in other policy areas of California's Race to the Top approach will only become more relevant as climate change continues to become an increasingly imminent threat to the United States. Though economic health may continue to be the most urgent issue on voters' minds, it is not necessarily correct to say that a state sacrifices economic health for environmental health. This is something that California's voters seem to agree with, being that they continue to vote in favor of environmentally strong policies as they have done for decades. Though more long-term research may need to be done to examine the economic impacts of specific climate-friendly policies, and while we know that certain policies, such as cap-and-trade policies, can certainly cause fossil fuel prices to rise, this is not the only measure of economic health. And if job creation is happening in the green energy industry, and if cleaner forms of energy continue to get cheaper, these higher fuel prices may become less of a burden to people anyway. Going forward, the green energy sector may need to prove that it can bring enough jobs to the economy and create enough energy that is cheap and reliable to produce if it is realistically going to compete with fossil fuels in states that aren't so ripe for the transition to renewables as California is.